evening from the News Radio, 1120 AM and 93.7 FM, KPNW studios. I am Zero Jones. Actually, I'm Bill Lundun. I do the wake-up call on KPNW Monday through Friday morning, 6 a.m. to 9 at 1120 a.m. and 93.7 FM, and also streaming worldwide at kpnw.com. Hey. Look at us being 21st century. We stream. This look at the news brought to you by Dr. Michael Bratland. Yes, the boisterous dentist whose name is under the big sign that says Chris Dental. And if you call him today, he'll see you today. He's the only dentist I know that actually gives you his personal cell number. True fact. All right, here's a look at the stories we're following. Well, Oregon's short legislative session has started. 35 days of fun and frolic. And as those in charge of the legislature, basically the Democrats that run both the House and the Senate, they will tell you without a doubt our biggest things that we need to do, because we only have 35 days. We have to do something about homelessness, and we have to do something about drugs. And in particular, some sort of, as they like to call it, reform of Ballot Measure 110. That said, it should be noted that while housing and drug policy are supposed to be the top priorities in this very short legislative session, more than 150 bills have been introduced so far in total, and they delve into lots of other topics. Like, for instance, House Speaker Dan Rayfield wants another $50 million to go to Oregon's semiconductor industry, even though they just received well over $100 million not even a year ago. And Senate President Rob Wagner wants to increase spending on the state's education system. The Democrats also want to increase taxes by creating a state property tax. Okay, for those of you that live in Oregon, you know that you pay your property taxes to the county. Well, the state wants their share of that. And by the way, constitutionally, was Measure 5 and Measure 50, which limited how much and how fast those property taxes could go up. Well, this state property tax is written so it would fall completely outside of that, meaning that your legislature could raise your property taxes however much they want, whenever they want. And they talk about, well, housing is so darned expensive that it's hard for families to even keep a roof over their head. And so let's add to the cost of that by increasing the taxes on it. And by the way, for you folks that rent and say, well, that doesn't affect me, your landlord pays property taxes. And do you know who pays for the landlord's property taxes? Check a mirror. Oh, yeah, and by the way, the legislature also wants to try and do away with your kicker tax refund. Hi, we're the legislature, and we're here to help. The 35-day short legislative session was sold to Oregonians, much like Ballot Measure 110, under false pretenses. They said, all this session is going to be for is just making minor budget tweaks so that we can keep on our budget like we're supposed to and handle any emergencies. And it's just supposed to be short. We're not really going to be doing anything in the way of passing bills. I say go back to every other year. All right, another one of those bills that is now in the Senate and being discussed is Senate Bill 1585. And it would further expand federal food stamps to cover foods like pizza, hamburgers, hot dogs, French fries, and the like. So Welfare's food stamp program already covers the purchase of junk food here in Oregon, everything from ice cream to Oreos. Well, Senate Bill 1585, the summary reads, the act requires the Department of Human Services to set up a work group and come up with a plan for a program that allows people who receive SNAP aid to buy hot foods that are ready to eat, including restaurant meals. Requires the department to implement the program on a statewide basis or as a pilot program. And look, I'm not going to argue. There are people out there that need those SNAP benefits, that need the food to feed their kids. But come on, going into the hot case at, say, a convenience store or a gas station or going out to a restaurant seems like it's a little beyond what DHS was initially thinking about when they started offering food stamps. And you want to take this further, since this will handle fast food, you got to ask yourself, people always say that kids are obese and that people were obese, and so what are you doing by enabling it? Just asking. Okay, again, in this short session that's supposed to be about, the drug problem and generating more housing, Democrats also added another bill. They did that yesterday by proposing to increase retirement benefits for district attorneys, 911 operators, and Oregon State hospital staff by placing them in the same benefit category as police and firefighters. That would be a 20% increase in all those people's retirement benefits. This would be House Bill 4045, sponsored by, Democrat from Portland Representative Dacia Graber. And it would also lower the retirement age from 60 to 55 for police and firefighters in the Oregon Public Employees Retirement System's newest tier, the Oregon Public Service Retirement Plan. The bill comes at a time when PERS faces an unfunded liability, a big one. Right now, there's only enough money to meet 78% of those retirement system's obligations. So in other words, it's running 22% short. Well, guess what? That's going to go up. And it would also, and this is interesting and will be really ironic if this passes, it would undo a lot of the benefit cuts that were spearheaded by then House Speaker and now Governor Tina Kotek back in 2019, if you were paying attention. Now, the public employee unions testified enthusiastically on behalf of House Bill 4045. And then you had your local governments that were saying, wait a minute, if you increase these retirement benefits, we're the ones that pay for that. And that's going to come at the expense of services and also potentially the salaries and jobs of employees. They say, according to the Special Districts Association of Oregon, we're concerned that House Bill 4045 risks making the entire system insolvent. Well, when you got to buy off the unions that give you all the support, that's what's going to happen. Now, one ironic thing, since it was Governor Kotek that actually, essentially spearheaded a lot of those cuts to try and keep PERS solvent, if this passes, will she sign it or will she veto it? I wonder. Okay, one of the other things that has been brought up that is supposed to be very important in this particular legislative session has to do with mental health. And Oregon's mental health infrastructure is, to say the least, horrible. Maybe this is a reason why, or at least an indication of it. All right, and we're going to talk about a crime. Now, Springfield is a town in Oregon, for those of you that are watching in Montana. Springfield is a town in Oregon, and it's right by Eugene. You could say that, they're miles apart, even though there's only a highway that separates the two of them in a lot of ways. So Springfield police arrested and jailed a guy, and he had stabbed another man 9 times. That, according to the police report. Springfield police say that they responded to a stabbing in progress in the 900 block of L Street. And a responding officer arrived, and what he found was the victim of the stabbing actually pinning down the suspect, who was a guy named Thomas Robert Murphy, who also lives in Springfield. Now, police said that a responding officer worked with the victim to get Murphy handcuffed. The officer noted, oh, this guy is bleeding from his thighs and his lower torso. Actually, that knife punctured one of the guy's lungs. They say the incident began when Murphy, the perp, started yelling incoherently at the victim, who was performing some tree work in the area. He was actually trimming his shrubs. Now, Murphy then confronted the victim in the street, pulled out a knife, and stabbed the victim 9 times. Now, that victim was transported to a local hospital for treatment of very serious injuries. Actually deflated one of his lungs. So Murphy was arrested, and he was transported to the Lane County Jail, where he sits today facing first-degree assault charges. Well, what's interesting is that this isn't the first time this guy's, shall we say, been on the police radar. Let's go back to 2015. He was found guilty by insanity for attacking 2 women with a pickaxe and a hammer on L Street in 2014. And he went to jail in 2015. And according to the Lane County District Attorney, Murphy was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and was sent to the state mental hospital and placed under the jurisdiction of the state Psychiatric Security Review Board. And the judge said that this man is to remain in custody for a minimum of 30 years. That's what the judge said in 2015. In March of 2017, officials from the Psychiatric Review Board determined, well, Murphy no longer has a mental disease or a defect. And they said, well, the 2015 stabbings were probably just due to an amphetamine-induced psychotic disorder. And so they released him from custody. And all the prior charges were dropped. All right. These people are supposedly mental health experts. These are the people that are in positions of leadership within our mental health system in the state. And I'm really kind of wondering here if you really want to ask the question, what's the real problem with our mental health care system here in the state of Oregon? This is a perfect example of what's wrong with it. The people leading it. Oh, was that editorializing? Yeah, okay, maybe it was. So the NTSB, that's the National Transportation Safety Board, in case you didn't know, they've released a preliminary report on that January incident where a door plug blew out of a Boeing 737 MAX 9 plane over Portland. Remember that? Investigators now say 3 bolts appear to have been left off the plug. And they say that happened after maintenance work was conducted in September by Spirit Aerosystems, the company that actually manufactured the plug for Boeing. They say that 3 bolts were left off. That door plug only has 4 plugs. And what was interesting was the NTSB said, we're not blaming anybody. Oh, okay. So this may sound like an odd question, but we're talking about a door that weighs a couple of 100 pounds that is attached to a vehicle that flies at 600,000 or 600 miles an hour at 35,000 feet. And that door weighs a couple of 100 pounds and is about as big as a refrigerator. And you've only got 4 bolts that hold the thing in place? 4 bolts? Now, I would understand it if the bolts were, say, this big around, but I've seen pictures of the bolts. They're not. They're like about that big around. And there's only 4 of them. Now, let me do a little comparison for you here. Let me show you something. It's visual aid day. All right. So What this unit is what's known as a telephone hybrid. This is a piece of radio equipment. And what it's used for is to put phone calls on the air on the radio station. This object weighs about 6 pounds. It has a power supply, a motherboard, a few LEDs, and on the back, it has a couple of places where you plug in phone cables and run cables from the box to your actual mixer board in the studio. Okay, so this unit, and I'm not going to ask you to count them, but it has 26 screws holding on a lid, a piece of aluminum that's about a 1/16 of an inch thick. This does not fly at 35,000 feet at 600 miles an hour. This is totally stationary and sits about 2 feet above the floor, where it lives its entire life until it dies or it's retired and put in keep as a spare file. If some nerd that designs electronics equipment thinks something like this deserves 26 screws, you would kind of think that somebody that's in aeronautics engineering would look at a door that weighs a couple of 100 pounds, that plugs a giant hole in the side of an aircraft, and would say to themselves, let's splurge and do 6 bolts instead of 4. Just saying. And finally, this is my favorite story of the week. I don't know if you've ever been to an estate sale, but they can be pretty fascinating. I've been to a number of them. I find them interesting. I mean, you kind of get a snapshot into a person's life. I went to one time where a gentleman who had passed away and he didn't have any family. They were, auctioning all of this stuff off at the estate. He had a 1958 BSA motorcycle with a sidecar, and it was cherry. Another one I went to at one point, somebody actually had one of those big, huge theatrical Wurlitzer pipe organs that was in his house that they were selling. I've been to a number of them, and I always find them fascinating. So that leads us to our final story. So police found a rocket in a Western Washington state man's garage that he had picked up at an estate sale. And that old rocket turned out to be an inert nuclear missile. So on Wednesday of last week, the National Museum of the Air Force near Dayton, Ohio, called Bellevue, Washington police to report somebody had called up with an unexpected gift offer. Police then responded to the potential owner's home with a bomb squad. The police say that the device is in fact a Douglas Air 2 Genie, which was also known as the MB-1. It was an unguided air-to-air rocket designed to carry a 1.5 kiloton nuclear warhead that this guy got at an estate sale. Okay. So the bomb squad showed up and they decided, well, we probably need to give this a once-over to see if it's going to be a threat to the community. Okay. They said they checked it out and discovered doesn't appear to be a warhead present here. And then they told the folks at the Military Museum, and the National Museum of the Air Force called back and said, you know what, we don't really think that we want your rocket, so you can go ahead and keep it. They said since officials discovered that there was no nuclear warhead present, there was no need for evacuations in the city of 150,000, 10 miles east of Seattle. No warhead here. They evacuate neighborhoods when somebody finds something that even looks like a hand grenade. Anyway, I gotta wonder, how that conversation with the bomb squad went. First off, I didn't realize that your typical, municipal police department bomb squad actually, knew how to check for nuclear warheads. And I got to think, that probably at one point somebody said, that looks like an intercontinental ballistic missile. It may have a nuclear warhead. Let's play it safe and send over the robot while we hide behind the van. Anyway, that's my favorite story of the week. All right, there's a look at your news brought to you by Dr. Michael Bratland of Chris Dental. Rick, feel free. Give us a big old heaping helping of real.